well. But you need some type of medium. So, for example, in space, you hear that phrase from Alien, in space no one can hear you scream. It's because there's no sound in space. There's no air in space. It's a vacuum. So there's nothing for sound to be able to travel through. So sound is a wave that reaches our ears and will vibrate and allows us to hear. Now, these sound waves come in lots of different shapes and sizes. So the waves is how sound reaches our ears. And these can come in, different pitches essentially, or different frequency to be more accurate. So one of the first terms that you need to get familiar with when it comes to talking about sound is frequency. What is the frequency of sound? Well, frequency is also known as pitch. And that's the number of times per second that a sound wave, pressure of sound will repeat itself. The higher the frequency, the higher the pitch is going to be, the more waves are going to be packed in and condensed. And this is measured in hertz. So again, this might be a term that you may have seen before. It's actually a term that also applies to flash photography as well, with a similar idea. It's to do with the frequency of how quickly the flash fires off. It's similarly here with sound. It's how quickly those sound waves are reach your ear. And the faster that they reach your ear, the more condensed they are, the higher the pitch is going to be. So if we were to visualize it, this would be known as a low frequency. The waves are longer, so they're spread out, the further spread out they are, the lower the pitch is going to be. If we have a high pitch wave, a high frequency wave, the pitch is going to be much higher because the waves are much closer together. Now, they occupy the same amount of space if you compare the two of the waves here. But as we can see in the high pitch, there's many more waves here condensed, and this gives us a higher sound, a higher pitched sound. It does not mean a louder sound. That's something else we'll speak about in a second, but it means that the actual kind of tone would be much higher. It'd be like, say, you were speaking, if you had a helium balloon, you use the helium to make your voice go very, very high. You're changing the pitch of your voice. Okay, now in terms of loudness, that's to do with amplitude, which I'm sure you're familiar with this as well, when we talk about amps. So the amplitude of a sound determines its loudness or determines its volume. And a larger amplitude, of course, means a higher sound, and a smaller amplitude means a softer sound. So looking at our waves again, amplitude is all to do with the actual height of the waves. So if you think about frequency or pitch as to be doing with how many waves you have, whether they're very close together or whether they're very spaced out. Amplitude is to do with the height of those waves, which indicates the loudness of those waves. As you can see here in this very simple diagram, the top one here, that has a smaller amplitude than the lower one here, where we can see that the waves are much, much higher, meaning that we get a much louder sound. So that's frequency, is to do with our pitches, whether it's low, whether it's high pitch, and amplitude is then to do with our loudness. Then we have envelope. So envelope is a bit of a more unusual one that you may not have come across before, but it is very important at a later stage when we start speaking about how to edit sound. An envelope basically it's the shape of sound for a very simplified explanation. Like, for example, if you press a piano key, so there's the initial press of the key, then there's kind of the sound as it falls off and fades away. So it's broken down into a couple of different sections. So attack would be pressing the key. The decay is, the initial decline after pressing the key. The sustain is for how long that note is held, and then the release is when you finally release it and it kind of fades away into silence. Okay, so that's an envelope, and that's single note. So if we were to say your attack, decay, sustain, and release. Attack, decay, sustain, and release. So these four terms come together to create the envelope of sound, which is essentially the shape of sound. Now, sound is measured in decibels. So this is perhaps, again, another term that you would be familiar with. But decibels, they can actually be a little bit confusing in terms of, when we measure things like light, we talked about stops in the previous lesson, or you're measuring temperature and so on. Decibels tend to be a little bit more complicated. So I'll try my best to explain exactly how decibels work. And basically, decibels measure sound intensity. It measures sounds that are within the range of human hearing. Of course, there's sounds that are beyond the range of human hearing, like say dog whistles, where the sound is far too either too high. I think it's way too high for human ears to perceive, and certainly dogs are able to hear it and so on. The pitch is simply too high. But decibels can be confusing because when using sound equipment as well, it's measured slightly differently from then, say, the human ear. But typically, when we speak about decibels, we talk about them in the decibel scale. The dB is measured in comparisons and in logarithms rather than a linear scale. So it's kind of mathematical in terms of how we measure decibels. So to really just simplify that, generally when people were referring to decibels, they refer to something like the decibel scale here, which is a comparison scale. A comparison scale to give an idea using everyday examples of the kind of decibel range that you're dealing with. So say, a whisper or light snoring, usually around 30 decibels. A quiet room less than that, even just breathing would be around 10 decibels. Very, very low. However, then we know, say, if you're on a plane, jet plane takeoff, very, very loud, or a gunshot or a metal concert, very, very loud here at all the way up to 130. So, when we're talking about decibels in terms of how human ears perceive them, which starts at 0 and it goes all the way up and it keeps going up beyond 130 and so on. But it starts at 0, and anything else below 0 is simply beyond the range of human hearing. It's just simply too low for us to perceive. However, where it can get a little bit confusing, and I certainly found it confusing at the start, is that when we speak about decibels in relation to recording sound and sound equipment, 0 is actually the threshold. 0 is where we begin to get distortion in our sound. So when you look at a decibel scale on a piece of equipment, like as you can see here, or if you happen to be recording on your cameras, you're more than likely going to see a decibel scale in terms of the sound. You can see that we have a minus and we have a plus, and with the plus area where it says 100% and then it goes into the red, anything beyond that is going to have distortion on it. Okay, so it's not the exact same as the decibel scale that we use for our perception of hearing when it comes to the human ear. It's slightly different, and 0 actually is where it's going to get too loud and we're going to get distorted. So we actually want to try and keep it somewhere usually in the middle, from about 10 or minus 10 decibels there. Okay, but it's going to completely depend on what type of sound you need to capture. But as you can see, anywhere in that kind of black range should give us a decent quality sound. Perhaps minus 20 decibels is going to be too low. You're probably going to get a little bit of a hiss at that stage. You want to try and keep it somewhere in the middle. The main thing is just avoiding going into that red area, those levels. So they are some of the most frequent terms that you will hear in regards to sound. That's your frequency, your amplitude, your envelope, and your decibels. And they're the kind of the basics when it comes to understanding sound. That's your pitch, that's your loudness, that's your shape of sound, and then we finally got the way that we measure sound using our decibels. So with that in mind, let's have a look at how we can actually begin to record sound. And I cannot underestimate the importance of sound. So Hans Zimmer, hopefully you're familiar with him. If you're not, obviously a very, very famous cinematic composer, has done incredible scores. I have to say one of my favorite scores is the one he did for Interstellar, that Christopher Nolan movie a good few years back now at this stage. But as he says, if you talk to any director, they'll say music is 50% content of the movie. And he's actually speaking about Steven Spielberg, George Lucas. They were kind of two actual massive pioneers when it came to sound in cinema. They knew the importance of getting sound right to enhance the experience of cinema goers. And he's absolutely right. It is such a massive part of it. And the thing that you have to realize when it comes to sound is that sound cannot be easily repaired in post-production. You really need to make sure that you get it right at the time of recording, and trust me, I am speaking from experience here, having done many of these lessons. There's times where, sometimes I might have been too far away from the microphone, or it was too close and the sound was too loud. It's very difficult to repair, and in most cases you end up having just to re-record the entire thing again. So I cannot stress to you how important it is to make sure you get it right at the time of the recording. And it's not that difficult. There's just a few steps that you need to take to ensure you get high quality sound. The first is to pay attention to your audio levels. So I spoke about decibels there just a few moments ago. We can make sure that our sound is correct by using our audio levels. Levels relate to the overall level of sound, and it can be broken down into bass, treble, tone, etc. But generally, we use levels to visualize, to ensure that the sound is neither too high or that it's going to be too low either, which is also a problem. But levels, they should just be your visual way of making sure that your sound is okay, monitoring your sound. You're going to need to be listening to your sound constantly as well. You're going to want a good set of headphones. I'll speak about that now in just a moment. Now, generally all devices that are capable of recording sound will have something that looks similar to this in terms of how it measures levels. It might be vertical rather than horizontal, but it's usually always going to be broken down into green, yellow and red. Okay, so on the green side of it, this is where we would be going from low to high, and if you're finding that your levels are consistently in this area, your sound is going to be too low. Okay, you're going to end up with a hiss in the background, this kind of hissing sound within the background, which can be difficult to remove, it can be difficult to repair. So our acceptable levels where we're trying to aim for should be anywhere from 12 decibels to 20 decibels within this type of range. Okay, this yellow area is known as our headroom. So it means that it doesn't matter if we have quite a lot of yellow when we're actually recording, because it still means that our sound is good, but it serves as, I suppose, a kind of a warning to make sure that you're not going into the red. It's just to kind of basically say, well, just keep an eye on your levels, make sure it doesn't go too high, and then of course if it goes into the red, you're in danger of distorting the clip. Now, often when I record, I'll often see a little bit of red when I'm recording. It doesn't necessarily mean that the sound is going to be awful or it's going to be terrible. But if it's consistently red, if it's constantly up in the red, you are definitely going to have an issue. So you want to try and keep it within that range of minus 12 decibels to about minus 20 decibels, and just always keep an eye on it and try and get it, somewhere into that yellow area. Now, as I mentioned, the reason that it's so important to get it right is that sound is very difficult to repair afterwards. Too loud and your sound is going to become distorted and be clipped, which means you cannot retrieve lost sound. You're actually going to lose sound if the sound becomes too loud. Too low and you're going to hear a hiss in the background, and this can be somewhat managed with noise reduction afterwards and noise removal. However, your sound will still be poor, and if it's too low it might sound that you're in almost like an echo chamber, and then if you use the noise reduction it can end up sounding like you're in a bubble. So you want to very much try to avoid having it too loud or too low. Really try to keep it somewhere within the middle. Now, I mentioned clipping there when it comes to being too loud. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think back to our amplitude diagram, we saw that one of those clips or one of those sound waves was much larger, much higher than the other one. What is actually happening here is that sound wave is going beyond the range of acceptable levels and is actually being cut off, and that's what creates distortion. So a good soundtrack should look something like this. As you can see here, we've got a very kind of funny looking shape, but this is all of the sound that looks like a vocal track to me, very much like a vocal track to me. Here, where you can see the peaks and the different low parts. So the peaks are kind of, your treble, your higher parts, your low parts of your bass, and so on. And if you were to zoom in on that and keep zooming in, you can, eventually begin to see the different waves and so on. When you're looking at a zoomed out version of a block of sound, this is typically what it looks like. A clipped soundtrack is going to look something like this, and you can see with a clipped soundtrack, and this is something I hate to see myself when I'm recording, you can see here at the very top and the bottom that there's like a straight line, and that's actually because the sound is being cut off. You're actually losing sound. Now, you can turn down that sound. You can bring that clip back into some kind of range where it's not too high, but that sound is gone. It has been lost. At the time of recording, it went beyond the range of what can be recorded, and it's just simply gone altogether. You cannot get that back, so you're still going to have some distortion even if you reduce the sound, if you turn down the actual sound itself. Okay, so this is something you need to be very, very aware of. Monitor your levels. Make sure that your sound is not being clipped, and you should be fine. You shouldn't have too many issues. Now, it might seem a little bit daunting, but when you take a few basic steps, we'll have a look at it in a moment, it's very, very easy to get good quality sound. Now, of course, you're going to need some type of equipment to capture good quality sound. So let's have a look at some different types of microphones that you can use. Okay, so first of all, the most common type of microphone is going to be our handheld, our kind of podcast type of microphones now as well. So this is actually the model that I use. It's the Blue microphone. They're very, very good. Okay, handheld microphones are designed to be held in the hand, but they can also be clipped into microphone stands, while someone sings or gives a speech or plays guitar and so on. But they have become very, very popular with podcasts too. Now, they'll often come with a range of pickup patterns as well. We'll speak about pickup patterns in just a few minutes, but that means you can kind of change the way that these type of microphones actually pick up sound. So this type of microphone is going to be great for doing things like interviews, or if you are into vlogging, or you're into, say, streaming, video games or anything like that. You'll see a lot of people use a microphone very, very similar to this type here. Now, the next type up is our shotgun microphones, and these are long, narrow tubes with slits evenly spaced along the side and then a capsule at the rear end. These are very direct types of microphones. Again, they can come with different types of pickup patterns, but generally they're known as directional mics because they are very much pointed in the direction of the subject whose sound you're trying to capture. They're often attached to boom mics as well, which are the stands, and you'll often see them. They'll have the big kind of wind covers on them as well, the furry kind of covers on them, and they're shotgun mics, and they're on boom stands. So a lot of people will often refer to them as boom microphones, and these are very much for when you can't get too close to the person who you're trying to record. So if you're doing TV, or if you're doing, say, documentary style, or you're doing a movie or anything like that, you would use this type of microphone. Then we have our lavalier microphones. So a lavalier is a small microphone that's attached directly to your actor's body or your interviewee's body, and they come in wired and wireless varieties, and they're designed to be lightweight and discreet. And again, these are very much then for picking up, vocals. You wouldn't typically use this for recording ambient sound or anything like that. You'd use the kind of the boom mics and the directional type of microphones for that. But this is for, if you're interviewing people, or, an actor might have one of these placed discreetly on their body so you can record the sounds. But a wireless lav mic, very, very good, because it means obviously a little bit more freedom of movement, and you can kind of slip the wireless pack. You can hide it on an actor's body somewhere. So lavalier microphones. And then Finally, we have our external digital recorders. Now, again, these come in lots and lots and lots of different varieties. Now, this type of one here would typically be used for, say, again, doing types of interviews, or, you know, picking up ambient sounds as well. You can place these in a room, say, for example, if you're trying to pick up room tone, or, you know, if you want to, say, pick up, you know, forest sounds, just to have in the background of a track and so on, you'd use one of these types of microphones as well. However, they capture the footage separately, or the audio separately, so you'd need to sync it up afterwards with your footage, particularly if you're using it for, say, an interview. You'd have to take the tracks and match it then to your footage afterwards too, which, I mean, in a lot of cases you're going to have to do that anyway, unless you're using, say, something like the boom mics, or using the handheld microphones where you're recording the footage as well as the audio all at the same time. Now, so with different microphones, you also need to consider different pickup patterns. And every microphone that I just showed there previously is available with different pickup patterns. And that is, they can record sound in different directions as is needed. Now, not every microphone is going to have a huge range of pickup patterns available to it. Some may only have one pickup pattern. Some may only have two different types of pickup patterns that are slightly different from each other. But it all completely depends on your use and the type of microphone that you happen to be using. But looking at the different types of pickup patterns, the first one is our omnidirectional. Now, often you're actually going to see these types of symbols displayed on the microphones themselves, but certainly you'll discover it when you're looking them up online, or you're researching, whichever one might take your fancy. Always be sure to check what type of pickup pattern it has. And this is omnidirectional. So the circle around the microphone basically means that it picks up sound in any direction. So whether you're standing in front of it, behind it, to the left, to the right, you know, or an angle or anything like that, it will pick up the sound. Now, these are great for, say, recording general ambient sound. You know, if you place them, say, again in the middle of a room and you're trying to pick up sound, say there's a lot of people speaking in a room, you want to try and pick up everybody that's speaking, you would use something like this. So it'd be good, say, for kind of crowds, or just capturing general kind of ambient tone and so on. What they're not good for would be doing something like a podcast, or where you've only got one person who you want to capture speaking, because they pick up sound in every direction. You could end up picking up the sound off the camera, or, you know, sound of people walking by, anything like that. So they're not particularly good if you're trying to do one-on-one type of situation, or you're trying to specifically pick up sound in one direction. Cardioid, these are much more common type, and these would be the type that I'd be using for doing these lessons. And the cardioid is basically one that picks it up in one direction. So these are also sometimes called unidirectional as well. One direction cardioid. As you can see, it's kind of got a circle around the front part of it. Now there's a dotted line around the whole thing, meaning that it can still pick up a little bit of sound, you know, happening to the left or to right. So you need to be very, very careful in terms of your placement with these types of microphones. But generally, you're going to be in front of it to get the best quality sound. So cardioid for podcast type of you know, sound capture, or indeed, you know, if you happen to be using a boom mic, they sometimes are cardioid as well. Typically though, with boom microphones, they're known as hypercardioid and unidirectional, as I mentioned. So these are variations on the cardioid pattern. So a hypercardioid, which is the one here over on the left hand side, we'll also have a little bit of room on the back as well to pick up a little bit of sound on the back. So say you're perhaps trying to pick up some tones and sounds, you know, in the background as well. You may use something like a hypercardioid. Unidirectional, as you can see, has a much narrower pattern. So this is very much the type that you'd be using if you happen to be using a shotgun type of microphone. You're pointed very much directly at your subject to try and just pick up the sound from them, with a little bit of sound coming in from the sides and the back again, just to add a little bit of tone, a little bit of atmosphere, a little bit of space to the overall sound as well. And then we have our bidirectional. And bidirectional, sometimes also known as the figure eight pattern, and this is be the type of one that would be used for doing interviews. So again, if you're doing, say, a podcast, or perhaps you're filming an interview or anything like that, you're going to have a figure eight type of pattern. So that means it can pick up, obviously, whoever's doing the speaking, doing it, asking the questions, and pick up your subject as well. Now, these types of bidirectional ones, quite often, as I mentioned, say with the blue microphones, the one that we use for the podcasts here, they actually have that option built into them, as well as the cardioid pattern. They actually have a bidirectional pattern built into them as well. So very often these types of podcast or directional type of microphones, handheld microphones, will have the option of picking different type of sound patterns, mainly used for capturing vocals rather than used for capturing, say, music or anything like that as well. But that doesn't mean they're exclusively used for capturing vocals. Now, whichever microphone and pattern you decide that you want to go with or is right for your purpose, it's always really, really important to have a good quality set of headphones as well. Essential when recording sounds. We can't just purely rely on our levels from a visual viewpoint, as we spoke about a little bit earlier on. It's really important that we monitor the sound as we are recording it as well. So we make sure there's no hissing, there's no distortion on the audio, but also not just that, also make sure that where we're actually pointing our microphone and the sound that we're actually trying to capture is the main thing that we're hearing, and we're not hearing too much background interference. Like, say, you happen to be recording in a situation where there's a lot of background traffic. You don't want that traffic to be too loud and drowning out the sound of your subjects and so on. So you need, or perhaps if you're recording music, you want to make sure that the levels of all your instruments and everything like that, or that your vocalist isn't being drowned out by the rest, like the drums or anything like that. So sound is really, really important to monitor. And obviously you wouldn't be able to tell that just from looking at the levels. You need to be able to listen to it as well. Now, many sound devices, microphones, etc., have the option for plugging in a set of headphones now as well. They're built that way so you can actually monitor the sound as you are capturing and recording it. Now, so whichever microphone you decide to use and you've got yourself all set up, here are some tips, 5 basic rules for better audio. So if you follow these rules, you should capture good audio no matter what equipment you happen to be using. So the first thing is get close. Get as close as possible. The closer, the better. Okay, this will help to capture the audio of whoever's speaking. Too far away, you're going to pick up room tone, you're going to pick up echo, which is difficult to repair and get rid of. Now, you also obviously don't want to have the microphone right up in somebody's face because you're going to end up then with perhaps distortion in that case. But this is why you need your headphones to monitor the exact perfect distance. But the closer, the better. So when, for example, as I'm recording right now, if I was just to lean back in my chair and start recording from here, hopefully you can hear the difference. Okay, so I'm maybe just about a foot away from the microphone now. If I get too close, it's probably going to get a little bit distorted and a little bit loud. So it's difficult to find the exact perfect range, but the only way you can do it is by testing. Now, on top of that as well, as I mentioned, I cannot stress the importance of having headphones. So I have my headphones plugged in right now as I'm recording this to monitor the sound to make sure that it sounds all okay to my ears, and hopefully then sounds all okay to your ears as well. But put it this way, as I mentioned there, you would not cook without tasting the ingredients. A professional chef is going to always taste exactly what it is they're cooking to make sure that it tastes okay. The exact same when it comes to sound. You should always make sure that your sound is okay by monitoring it with headphones. You can monitor your levels as well. So as I mentioned before, using the visual side of it, just look at your levels, and you want to try and keep within that magic range of minus 12 decibels to 20 decibels, and make sure it's not consistently in the red. Otherwise, you're going to need to adjust the audio. And sometimes that's just a case of maybe taking a step back. or just turning down the levels on the microphone itself, just making a small little adjustment. It's also a good idea to do a little bit of scouting. So if you happen to be recording outdoors, say you're going to be doing a scene outdoors, go beforehand and maybe just do a quick test of where exactly you're going to shoot. Now, generally, when you are doing any kind of, say, bigger production, movies or anything like that, you're going to be scouting locations beforehand anyway, from a visual perspective, from a visual sense, to make sure it all looks okay. But also, while you're there doing that, you can also be testing out the sound and capturing up some, like in this case, capturing the sound of the waterfalls and that, just to get an idea of how loud things actually are and how it might play out when you introduce people into this situation. It's also very, very important as well to record some ambient or room tone. And this will help fill in gaps in sound and keep consistent sound throughout the footage. So ambient tone or room tone is exactly what it is. You're just placing a microphone within an empty space, and you're just hitting record, and it'll naturally just pick up the sounds that are there, and you may not hear them yourself, but certainly your microphones will. You just get this particular type of tone, this ambient tone. Even in somewhere that seems deathly quiet, you'll still pick up some type of tone, and you can use this as background to kind of keep all your footage sounding the same, so that when you're putting your audio clips together, that it doesn't seem like there's a sudden jump in the quality or the difference of sound, that you've got this nice room tone to kind of fill in those gaps, and so that you don't just have dead silence in between when somebody is speaking or when there's a transition into a next scene and so on. Now, so for the final part of our lesson, let's have a look at music and sound effects. And both music and sound effects can go a very long way into helping tell our stories, or to set the mood, of a particular scene, or if we're doing, say, an advertisement, to help to sell the product and give an idea of, who exactly this product is aimed at, and so on. In short, music has a huge impact on how we perceive the footage. So selecting the right music is very, very important to help to further enhance your scene and to tell the story. Let's have a look at just two very quick examples where selecting the right and selecting the wrong music can have an impact on the scene. So here is our scene here, Raindrops Falling. We've got a nice new age type of soundtrack to the scene here, very much matches the raindrops falling. So let's just sit back and have a look at the scene. So here we've got the same scene, but with a much more industrial, heavy type of soundtrack. And again, there's a certain beat here that does actually match the raindrops falling, but as we'll just sit back and listen, it really does not match the footage. So it should be clear from those two pieces of music and that footage about how important selecting the right music is for your scene. So to help you with that, just a couple of things to ask yourself. First of all, what is the message? What is exactly the message you're trying to get across in your scene? Is it an advertisement? Are you selling a product? Or is it a narrative? Are you trying to build emotion in the scene, build tension into the scene? What is music's role in the scene? Is it just going to be background music, just so there's not dead silence in the background? Or is it actually going to play a narrative role? Is it going to help to build tension, to make things kind of scary? Is it going to add a thrill? Or is it going to just play kind of a background role, just have two actors talking over it, not building up any tension, or not really having any impact on the narrative? It defines the mood, and that's not just the mood of the scene, but the overall mood of the film. So, you can be thinking about a certain genre, a type of music that you want to use, to give your film a particular type of theme. Like for example, say Blade Runner, there's a futuristic kind of theme to that. Vangelis uses a lot of synths. but he did use a lot of piano and things like that in it as well, to kind of give it a more melancholy type of feeling throughout the entire film. So you can think about that if you want to have, like, say, an industrial type of score, or hard rock score, or if you want a pop type of score. You can also mix up genres absolutely as well, but you shouldn't mix up too many genres. It can get a bit confusing. Consider your audience as well. So consider who is watching your film or who is watching your advertisement, your vlog, etc. If you want to have kind of a light feel to the film or to the footage, think about if your audience, if you're after a particular kind of say kind of alternative type of audience, you might want to have a hard rock kind of genre within your movie, etc. You do want to avoid vocals. So unless there's a particular scene that you want to have a song in it that has vocals, generally you should avoid them, because sometimes they're a little bit too on the nose and they can really heavily influence the scene and not leave too much room for interpretation. Don't steal music, and source your music. Either buy the music outright, where you can use it in your scenes, with no royalty issues, or look for royalty-free music online as well. There's heaps and heaps of places you can look online. We'll discuss that later on in this course in terms of resources, but you do not want to steal music, or else you're in for a world of trouble. Now, with that then, is also to consider sound effects. So most sound effects are actually added afterwards. But there are huge libraries available to add whatever you need again online. However, you can always record your own. Like in this situation, recording the exhaust of a Ferrari, that might be something they're using to put into a video game or something like that. But this process is known as Foleying. And Foleying comes from Jack Foley, and he was a developer of many sound effect techniques used in filmmaking, and in particular using different objects to produce sounds, like, say for example, capturing rain. You would have a piece of paper, kind of crinkly paper, and have something like peas or something like that move around it to create the sound of rain. So he's credited with developing a unique method for performing sound effects live and then synchronizing them with a picture during a film's post-production. I think a good example is, if you think about coconuts used for replicating the sound of horse hooves, that is Foleying, obviously named after Jack Foley. He has a place in cinema history for eternity, with Foley named after him. Now, just a couple of other things just to finish out this lesson as well. Very often too, ADR is done in post-production or post-sync, and this is automated dialogue replacement. So sometimes when you're recording on set, you may need to actually record the sound separately and sync it in afterwards as well, because for whatever reason, maybe it wasn't captured right at the time. And sometimes it's just there just to improve the quality of the audio. This is also basically dubbing. So when you're dubbing over the sound, over the dialogue, to make sure that it sounds perfect. There's also sound editing and sound mixing, which often can get confusing, and there is a difference between them. And in layman's terms, sound editing is all about collecting the sounds needed for a film, so using the right sounds at the time of filming. Without editing, you just have sound from the set, so about collecting different sounds that you can use. The actual recording and creation of sounds both on and off set. Mixing is putting all of the sounds together. The vocals, the music, the ambience, the tonality, the dialogue, the sound effects, everything happens in the mixing stage. And both editing and mixing are two separate processes. There's actually two separate Oscars for best sound editing and best sound mixing. So it is actually recognized that they are two different skill sets. So that is the end of our lesson number 7. So we actually